This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
This week we're joined by a member of the House Education Committee to try to unravel exactly what it is our teachers want.
The problem is that the unions want to discuss this issue with the ministry on an equal basis. In other words, they have to decide together. They don't accept that the ministry is going to offer this evaluation scheme without them agreeing. That is a problem, basically.
And we preview an upcoming lecture on the Middle East, and in particular the link between oil, the economy, and the inequalities.
We're looking at what many have said is the most unequal region in the world. We see enormous wealth and a tiny billionaire class in places like Saudi Arabia, alongside mass displacement, mass devastation and poverty in places like Gaza, in Yemen, Sudan and elsewhere. And this polarization of wealth, this inequality, is inextricably linked to the question of oil and the oil resources of the Middle East.
There was an important meeting at Parliament earlier this week when the Education Committee was discussing the government's proposals on teachers and particularly how they and their performances are assessed. Most of the teachers' unions seem to be up in arms about this. We're joined by one of the members of the Education Committee. He is MP Marios Mavridis. Marios, this has been discussed for years and years, as I recall, because I've spoken about it many times. What is the problem?
The problem is that the unions want to discuss this issue with the ministry on an equal basis. In other words, they have to decide together. They don't accept that the ministry is going to offer this evaluation scheme without them agreeing. And that is a problem, basically.
Without them agreeing, and yet they have been talking to various ministers about this for, as far as I can remember, the last 7 or 8 years?
Yeah, this goes on for years. And the problem now is that it's a requirement in order to raise some funds from the European Union plan, which provides money to countries who make reforms. It is one of the reforms that we promised to do. And it seemed to be easy, but obviously it's not easy. Cyprus has a tradition of compromise between the laborers and the employers in all sectors of the economy. And we hope that this tradition continues. But in this education sector, the unions are very strong because they have a weapon which is very strong but sensitive. They can go on strike. And that is a problem. If this problem was not there, I'm sure we could find a solution very quickly.
Well, could we? You were very, I think, let's say diplomatic, calling it a compromise. In actual fact, it's blackmail. They have been disagreeing with any change to the assessment of their performances for all the years we've been talking about. And they also, of course, have a very powerful lobby when it comes to a voting bloc and elections will be coming up before too long. It seems every time that Parliament caves.
Yeah, but now this time there is a risk that they may go over the limit. I mean, you can have the power to negotiate, but if you go over the limit, it may backfire. So people in Cyprus, the society in general, understand this as a blackmail, just like you said it. I believe that they do have a say in the evaluation plan. They have to have a say, but not the last word. The last word is the ministry that has to decide, because the ministry is the employer. However, even now, we still have a hope that there will be a compromise so that we continue to act in harmony with the unions, so that they accept it. You know, if the employees do not accept an evaluation plan and you enforce it, it may have the opposite result. It's better to have a plan that everybody agrees.
How could it have the opposite result? If you decide that they are going to be assessed in a certain way, and that's the way they will be assessed, then if they try to take action because they don't like the way it's assessed, they won't get a very good report. And then what? They won't get promoted. At the moment, it seems to me that it's all down to this business of you're in the queue, and the higher up the queue you go, the more likely you are to get promoted, get a better salary, and it's actually regardless of whether or not you're any good at teaching. That's the problem, because the people who are suffering are our children.
What you're saying is correct, provided the principals are very strong and they do their job properly. In most cases, and not just in education, in everywhere in the public services, the managers do not have the authority to impose their will. Or put it in a different way, they do have the authority, but there is they are very reluctant to impose their will. They like to compromise as well.
Well, that's part of the problem, isn't it? You need people in charge. You can't have managers who can't manage.
Yeah, that's why I suggested many times that schools must be autonomous and they should act independently from each other, trying to compete in a healthy environment, like the United Kingdom, for example, where schools are autonomous. That would be a very good step forward.
But the teachers won't agree to that if they think it's going to affect their standing, will they?
They don't agree with that. They don't agree with that.
Sorry, Marius, you're laughing. It's not funny. We're seeing our children regularly close to the bottom of pan-European measurements for how education is going. And so, as I say, it's the children who are suffering just so the teachers have a comfy life.
Of course, it's the children that are suffering. We understand that. But on the other hand, unions are still very powerful. And if you don't talk to them, and if we don't try to find a compromising solution, we may get into trouble. And you know, if they start arguing about this and take measures like strikes and stuff like that, things will be worse for the children. I don't think they will go that far, however. I think that a solution will be found. The disagreements are not so serious. The disagreements on the evaluation plan can be resolved.
What do they want?
They don't want the principal to evaluate them.
They want to evaluate each other like they've been doing for years, and we've seen where that leads.
Well, actually, the principal is preparing a report for each member of the staff. And that report is given to the inspectors. And the inspectors take that into consideration. So they do participate in the evaluation indirectly. The teachers, the unions, do not want them to participate directly by giving a grade, like a 20% weight on their evaluation by the principal.
Well, who else could do that evaluation? Because nobody else apart from the principal knows how these people behave in class.
That's true. The principals can make their report stronger. And inspectors are taking the report of the principals very seriously. So in a sense, they do participate in the evaluation. That's one point I do not understand about the unions, why they insist so much that the principals should not participate. And there is another point that they are arguing about, that this new evaluation scheme is going to require resources, additional labor, and they want the ministry to to promise that it's going to supply this, to provide this additional labor.
What additional labour is that? Have they said what it is? It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, well, because the evaluation scheme, the new evaluation scheme includes a lot of work to be done, and they believe that additional resources are required. And the ministry said, if we need additional people, of course, we will hire additional teachers. However, they want the unions want the ministry to promise that in a written statement, I guess, I don't know how they want it, but they want the ministry to promise that it will provide additional labor.
So basically more teachers, and those teachers are going to do what?
I don't mind more teachers as long as the results are better.
But what are these teachers going to be doing? Are they going to be teaching smaller classes? Are they going to be assessing the other teachers?
The number of students in the class will remain at 25.
So what will these other teachers be doing?
Additional teachers will be doing additional work that is included in the evaluation scheme.
You need to clarify that. What additional work? Surely the teachers, the head teachers, have got forms to fill in. I hope these are rather more nuanced than... I worked, as you know, at CYBC for many years, and every year the reports came out, and as a freelance, they didn't bother to report on us. We didn't even get a mark. But everybody else got excellent at the top of the marks, and I don't think I ever heard of anybody getting less than that. Now, if that's the same system in schools, it's pretty pointless.
Yeah, that's a problem. That's a problem. The evaluation scheme, according to my opinion, should be grading the employees with quotas. For example, so many people get 10, other people get 9, other people get 8. This is a system that is applied in many countries, especially in the private sector. But in Cyprus, it's not accepted, unfortunately.
I'm not sure I agree with quotas, because you could have a staff level at one school where they all are really 10s. And then if you say they can't all be 10 and you mark people down, that's not fair. So what you really need, why is this not measured in terms of the results the children get?
That is one suggestion that I made myself. That we should evaluate teachers based on the results of the students.
Of course.
Yeah, nobody wanted to hear about that. I made this suggestion, but nobody wanted to hear that.
Well, this is extraordinary. Marios, that's the only way you can tell whether a teacher is actually effective, is if the students get good results. And mostly the students do get good results if the teacher is empathetic, makes the lessons interesting, and engages the children.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I'm telling you again, I made this recommendation in the committee, but it didn't appear. There was no acceptance by everybody. People in our party, they do accept it, but they do support it, but other parties did not support it. If you ask me, the evaluation scheme that is proposed now is not strong enough to provide for these things that we both say. Another recommendation that I made is that teachers should be evaluated by their students. In other words, there should be a questionnaire which will be asking students to evaluate their teachers. They don't want to hear about that either.
Well, I think you could have, if necessary, a popularity contest. I don't know that you could say whether or not a student, especially the younger ones, are able to evaluate a teacher's teaching skills as such.
No, in high school you could.
Okay, the older students perhaps.
Not in the elementary school, but in the intermediate school, I think.
So where do we go from here? The committee meets this week, and you're under a lot of pressure, I think, to pass these changes, but you seem to think that the majority on the committee are going to back off rather than enrage the teachers.
No, the members of the committee, I believe all of us, would like for the two sides to compromise and come up with a solution that will be acceptable by both sides. But I believe that the last word is for the ministry. I do agree that the unions should have a say in how they are evaluated.
But they've had a say, Marios, for the last 7 to 10 years, and we're no further forward.
Yeah, this time though is a major restructuring, a major reform that it has been made. This evaluation scheme has been developed by experts. So it's a serious matter. It's not like somebody thought about this. It came out from studies that they brought experts to do this.
So the experts have said what should be done, but you're still actually kowtowing to the teachers who say we don't like that. Why call in the experts if you're not going to do what they suggest?
No, it was the right thing was to have an evaluation plan which is developed by experts. That's the correct procedure. This is the right way, but we have to listen to the unions as well, up to a certain extent. So we're going to ask them one more time if they can find a solution, and if they cannot find a solution, the committee each party will decide what to do.
But it doesn't sound as if the parliamentary committee is going to say, all right, you don't agree with the evaluation that I presume costs the government and the taxpayer a lot of money to make, so we'll just put it on hold until we can come to an agreement.
No, we don't want to do that. We are not going to put it on hold forever.
So what are you going to do?
We're going to discuss it in the committee. Each party may propose some things for voting.
And when will it go to the plenum, or what's the next step? Because does it have to go back to the ministry? Who is going to take the final decision that says we need to move on this, we'll do it this way?
Well, I know that at this moment there are a lot of discussions between the ministry and the government and the unions. They're trying to find a solution at this moment as we speak. But we have to wait until tomorrow to see what they have to say. And based on what they have to say, the committee will decide.
And then when you've decided, it will go straight to the plenum, or will there be more modifications made?
Modifications can be made by the different parties, either in the committee, accepted by everyone, or if they are not accepted by everyone, they are going to be voted in the plenary.
And the teachers will have another say before the vote?
No, that's it. Once the committee takes the responsibility to examine the plan, article by article, then nobody has a say after that. Only the parties, the political parties.
It really does need drawing to a close, if you ask me, Marios. I thank you for your time. We've been talking to Marios Mavridis. He sits on the House Education Committee, and I spoke to him on Tuesday before the meeting that would decide all those thorny problems. Marios, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up at the University of Cyprus on Monday is the third annual lecture on peace, conflict and democracy. It's organised by the Department of Social and Political Sciences, and the speaker is my guest on this week's programme. He is Professor Adam Hanye, and he's going to be talking about capitalism, conflict and the climate emergency, how fossil fuel politics have shaped inequality and violence in the Middle East. Adam, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the programme. I think this is interesting because an awful lot of people don't actually associate the politics with the environment or indeed the economy. Possibly they do, but this business of oil in the Middle East is far-reaching, isn't it?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Rosie, for inviting me on the show today. Absolutely. I think this question of the link between the rise of oil as the dominant fossil fuel, the principal fossil fuel around the middle of the 20th century, is so deeply linked to many of the conflicts we see in the world today, not least in the Middle East, and obviously connected to the unfolding climate emergency that we're seeing so graphically all around the world today. So I want to explore these themes in some depth in my talk next week.
And so what exactly are you going to be saying?
Well, I'm going to, in part, talk about why it is that oil emerged as the leading energy source, the leading fossil fuel around the time of the Second World War, what it did for capitalism, and what it did for, in particular, American power globally. The arguments I make in a new book called Crude Capitalism is that American power through the 20th century was inextricably linked to the rise of oil, and in particular, the rise of the Middle East oil producers in the Gulf states, the Gulf monarchies of Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and the alliance between the US and these Gulf oil exporters that emerged in the latter part of the 20th century. This, I think, is very timely today. We can see, the visit of Mohammed bin Salman to the US, the meeting with Trump. We can see that alliance really graphically on display in politics today. So one of the main things I want to talk about is that link. And then secondly, what does that mean for poverty, inequality, violence, conflict in places like the Middle East, not least, of course, the genocide in Gaza. So those are the kinds of themes I'm going to touch on in the lecture.
Is it fair to say that if you've got oil, you've got clout these days, even though renewables are coming up quite fast, they're not going to take over for an awful long time?
Absolutely, that's true to say. But there's been some really interesting shifts in the world oil industry over the last 2 decades. And again, this is something I'm going to speak to in the lecture. What we see since the early 2000s is the rise of large national oil companies in places like Saudi Arabia. So the biggest oil company in the world today isn't ExxonMobil, it's not Shell, it's not BP. It's actually Saudi Aramco. Saudi Aramco's profits last year exceeded the combined profits of the 5 largest Western oil firms, ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, Chevron, and Total Energies. So we can see this is a massive oil company, and it's owned by the Saudi government. What has happened since the early 2000s is that the oil exports of the Middle East increasingly go eastward. They don't go to Western Europe. They don't go to the United States. They go to China. They go to East Asia. So these shifts in how the oil industry work really have, I think, changed the balance and changed the industry in very, very significant ways.
Meanwhile, we have Trump saying, drill, baby, drill. Is he trying to claw back the clout that America used to have in terms of energy?
I think it's absolutely clear that the fossil fuel industry, the oil and gas industry in the US is one of the major supporters of the Trump administration. This was true in the first Trump, and it's certainly true today. And it's important to recognize, though, that the US is actually today the largest oil producer globally. This was to do with the shale revolution through the 2000s and the massive expansion in US oil production. However, US oil tends to be used in the United States itself or in North America and Canada. So it's not exported in the same levels that we see Saudi Aramco and the national oil companies that I spoke of earlier. So that kind of relationship to oil exports is really, really key to draw out here.
What about unexplored resources in the Middle East? Now, Cyprus keeps drilling for gas. I don't know that we'll ever get our hands on it before the whole economy on that one collapses. But there are other countries in the Middle East, not least, I think, possibly in the Sea off Gaza, that has presumably got oil.
There's oil and there's, as you pointed out, most importantly, gas reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean. And there's no doubt that both Cyprus, Greece, and the United States and the wider EU see these gas reserves in the Eastern Mediterranean, some of which are in Palestinian territory, as actually an important or possible way of alleviating European reliance on Russian energy supplies. So I think this is an important factor to consider when we're thinking about why it is that the United States and why it is that the European states have so vociferously supported Israel over the last couple of years in its war against the Palestinian people in Gaza.
And the role of China, they do seem to be trying to cut back on greenhouse gases, but that's one of the major markets for all of this, isn't it?
Absolutely. The largest oil importer, about 20% of the world's oil imports now go to China. And this is very much connected with the large national oil companies like Saudi Aramco, who now export the majority of the oil and gas to China and East Asia more broadly. I want to just point out, though, that, you mentioned earlier the question of renewables. And I think it's really important to understand that while there has been a growth in renewable capacity, there's been a growth in solar, there's been a growth in wind production and generation for electricity, this has not meant a lessening in the production of fossil fuels. In fact, last year was a record year in terms of oil production, coal production, and gas production. What we see is the case historically is that these additions of new energy come on top of increased fossil fuel production. So there's not a replacement of one energy source by another, but actually a ratcheting up of the total energy supply. And unfortunately, I think this is a feature of capitalism, and it's a problem because it obviously means that despite the fact we're getting more solar and wind capacity in places like China, that it doesn't mean that globally we're seeing a lessening of fossil fuel production. And that ultimately is the root cause of the climate catastrophe that we're seeing unfold globally today.
And of course, the population globally continues to grow, so the demand for energy will presumably also grow. We're in a bit of a pickle. Do you see any way of trying to minimize this impact? We see what's going on in Brazil at COP30 at the moment. Not a lot, it seems.
Well, absolutely. I think it's very clear that the COP summits, now 30 COP summits, are really basically tilting at windmills. They're not actually providing any source of hope. They're not providing any clear roadmap to moving away from fossil fuel production. And I think one of the reasons for that is that the COP summits have largely been hijacked by the fossil fuel industry itself. It's very revealing that, COP28 was held in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, and its president was the head of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. That really shows the influence and the power of these large oil producing states in blocking any effective action around the question of the climate. And ultimately, what we need to do, as scientists have made very clear, is leave these fossil fuels in the ground. And that obviously requires a wholesale change in the way we produce, the way we consume. And it also means addressing questions like poverty and inequality and access to energy at a global scale, because we live in a world today where there is a majority of the world's population that need more energy, that need more consumption, needs more access to goods. But we see instead the squandering of these resources and that the consumption by a tiny percentage of the world's population, headquartered in places like the United States and Europe, and increasingly in places like the Gulf.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that people don't connect is that those profits from the oil and so on are, as you're going to, I'm sure, say in your talk, having a huge impact on violence as well as inequality. People are fighting for every penny in a way, aren't they?
Well, that's absolutely the case. And one of the things that I'm certainly going to address in my lecture is if we're looking at, say, the Middle East today, we're looking at what many have said is the most unequal region in the world. We see enormous wealth and a tiny billionaire class in places like Saudi Arabia, alongside mass displacement, mass devastation and poverty in places like Gaza, in Yemen, Sudan and elsewhere. And this polarization of wealth, this inequality, is inextricably linked to the question of oil and the oil resources of the Middle East. So I want to make the argument very clearly that if we're trying to understand, for instance, what's going on in Palestine today, what's going on in Gaza, we need to think about the Middle East's centrality to the global oil economy. It's not just a question of long-standing religious conflicts. It's not just a question of what's happening in Gaza Strip itself. It's about the Middle East as a whole, and trying to place the oil supplies, the energy supplies of the region in the bigger global picture of American power is really the key to understanding why violence and conflict is so prevalent in places like the Middle East today.
And indeed what's driving migration, but we can't start that one, I'm afraid, Adam. We're out of time. I hope you have a hugely successful lecture on Monday. It's happening at the University of Cyprus at 6:30 through till about 8 p.m. We've been talking to Professor Adam Hanye from the University of Exeter. He's a professor of political economy and global development at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. Adam, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much, Rosie.
Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.